And joining us from England, we've got Major General Charlie Herbert, Major General retired. Charlie, good to see you again. Second appearance. How are you?
Nicole, no, really nice to see you. So Happy New Year. Can we still say that?
I don't know. What is the cutoff? That's an interesting
Probably
question.
about a week ago. Anyway, Happy New Year. Nice to see you again. Thanks for inviting me back.
Well, blessings for the new year. And a pleasure to have you back. It's always good to get old friends come on. And so what we're going to talk about today, Charlie, we were going to talk about Gaza. That was what we were going to talk about when we discussed this a few weeks ago. And in fact, pre-Christmas, actually. And I seem to be blessed with exceptional timing. We have a ceasefire on the table, which I didn't see coming. I thought it was a bit odd that we've got a ceasefire with a few days left. What have we got, like 5-6 days to go until the new president takes over in the US? And things are happening already, which begs the question, Charlie, why wasn't this done before?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nick.
It is a great question.
I mean, I don't know if your listeners saw Biden and Kamala Harris and Blinken the other day, what was it, 2 days ago in their press conference, sort of announcing this ceasefire and trying to take credit for it. And I kind of watched this and I wanted to throw the television out of the window, if truth be told, Nick. I mean, thinking, how on earth can you attempt to take credit for a ceasefire for a conflict that you've been aiding and abetting and sponsoring for the last 14 months? They could have wrapped this war up over a year ago. And I genuinely thought that American political support for this war would run out a long time ago. But no, there was endless political support for this from Joe Biden and America and no appetite to bring it to a close. And you're absolutely right. There's no coincidence, Nicole, about the timing of this. This has been driven by incoming President-elect Trump. He's laid down the ultimatum that there was to be a ceasefire, and this is kind of appears to be where they've got to. I mean, there's still some way to go, Nicole, isn't there? It doesn't start until Sunday. There are 3 phases to this. There's lots that could go wrong. I suspect it will face challenge and complications. Let's see what happens with this one.
Yep. May we be cursed and blessed to live in interesting times. But from my point of view, one of during this whole election cycle we've just gone through, and I think it's pretty obvious that most of the press and certainly in the West were heavily against Trump getting in. Same in America, when it comes to your main news channels and papers and what have you. And when you talk to people, and I try to be rational and to say what as an observer, you want to be an external observer and try and weigh up the pros and cons. And there was only one person over the past, 15 months now? This has been going on since, 15 months. There's only been one person who's actually consistently spoken about stopping these conflicts. He wants to stop the Ukraine conflict. He wants to stop what's going on in Gaza, calm things down with Iran. And I have been, for even bringing this up, I have been ridiculed. I wouldn't say attacked. It's not quite the right word, but ridicule being that people who say, "Oh, I can't believe that you buy into this nonsense that he's a peacekeeper." Now, I'm only going on what happened the first time he was in, and there was nothing much going on, and he stopped a bunch of things. I'm not saying it was all perfect by any stretch, and I find it unusual to the point of my spider senses start tingling that with a week to go, seems to be coming to an end because there's a new president coming in. And that, for me, is at the very least, very, very, very weird. And as I said, it makes my spider senses tingle because it could have been stopped a long time ago, Charlie.
Yeah, I mean, as I understand, Nicole, the terms of this ceasefire deal were largely agreed 8 months ago. There's not a lot in there, I think, which is particularly new. There was just a determination by Netanyahu to continue this war for his own political advantage. And there was a determination from the Democrat governments in the United States to allow Netanyahu to continue this war. I mean, it was as sort of simple as that. I absolutely agree with you. And in some respects, as you said, not many people necessarily, certainly in this country, necessarily wanted Trump to be re-elected to the United States. But I suspect many people are seeing some positives in that. If he is going to bring this war to a successful conclusion, and potentially if he can bring, the war in Ukraine to some form of acceptable political solution, that falls short of a complete cave-in and surrender to Putin. I mean, it's interesting about Trump. There's a lot what you just said there, Nicol, isn't there? An American colleague said to me recently. He said, America didn't necessarily vote for Trump. It's not necessarily that we want Trump back, Trump as an individual. It's that America wants change, and it wants change from Joe Biden and a Democratic government that I think has disappointed them, both domestically and in terms of its foreign policy. They just wanted change. And Trump's a familiar figure. What I think is quite interesting as Trump comes back into government in the United States is Trump in his first term was really all about US domestic politics. And that's what he was about, domestic relationships, rather than about foreign affairs. And I think it's going to be really interesting. I suspect Trump in his first 6 months will want to bring closure to what's going on in the Middle East, will want to bring closure to what's going on in Ukraine if he possibly can. Might try and line himself up for a Nobel Peace Prize if he possibly could. I saw some talk about that, believe it or not, this morning. It's hard to believe. And then spend the rest of his term focusing on US domestic politics and the US economy, etc. He's an isolationist, isn't he? More than anything. So it's going to be interesting to see. But to come back to your original point, Nicol, it's heartbreaking. Tens of thousands of people have died over the last 8 months. Unnecessarily innocent people, men, women, children, in a relentless and largely disproportionate campaign waged by the Israeli Defense Forces in Gaza. Tens of thousands have died to achieve a sort of ceasefire deal that could have been reached 8 months ago. I mean, and the other thing that's heartbreaking, I find, Nicol, is the kind of the utter futility of this conflict. And I've sort of said this right from the outset, is unless Israel pursue a parallel political track, if they just use military force alone, which is what they've done, to try to eliminate Hamas, they'll fail. And I genuinely believe that Israel has strategically failed in this campaign. Hamas are still in power in Gaza. Hamas haven't gone away. Yeah, sure, they've been attrited. But it's just, what have they achieved in the long run? Absolutely nothing. We're no closer to resolving the Palestine issue than we were 15 months ago. And I find that utterly heartbreaking. It's a bit like Afghanistan. That whole war was for naught. And I sometimes think that this whole war in the last 15 months in the Middle East has been for naught. And that is utterly heartbreaking.
Yeah. Agreed. I've spoken to some people who said that they agree with the tactics. Obviously, I disagree with the tactics because what we've seen is virtual complete destruction of not that big. Well, how big is Gaza? It's not very big at all, is it?
No, very, very small. It's about 10 kilometers, I think, wide, various stages. It's tiny.
Yeah, and you've destroyed the whole thing. People are going to have to go. Actually saw, which is a good thing, I saw these aid convoys going in, like endless streams of trucks going in as part of this deal, which is great. Well, it's great news. And you see these drone footage of what's happened to this place. And you think, what are you trying to do? You're leveling a civilian area. Okay, I understand. Yes, there are people there who have taken up arms now, but we know there's an awful lot of old people, women, children who are not getting involved. It, for me, seems to be ultimately what it is been I think, quite clearly a PR disaster for the state of Israel. And people have, I think, what they seems to have had the opposite effect. For me, if you're trying to win, when you're trying to win a war, you want to try and win the propaganda war. You'll know a lot more about this than I do. But I think that's been lost. I don't think there's many people you speak to who think this has been a success in any way, certainly from the propaganda side of things.
I mean, I think you and I very much share the same views on that perspective. I mean, the tactics, Nickel, yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. They've been entirely counterproductive. You cannot kill your way to a political solution, which ultimately is what is required. You can't just kind of wage war pointlessly and indiscriminately, disproportionately, with total disregard for the rules of law and expect a successful outcome, which is kind of pretty much what they've done. I mean, those that seek to justify Israel's or the IDF's actions will tell you they've done a damn good job at killing lots of Hamas, and they have done. But they've done an awful job at killing tens of thousands of innocent men, women, and children. Netanyahu himself is facing war crime charges in the ICC. It's not a good place to be for anybody. Israel's facing a charge of genocide, in the ICJ. As you say, I mean, I think they're held in utter contempt by most of the global South. You've got this organisation called the Hind Rajab Foundation. I don't know if you've come across this, Nickel, that are tracking all of the social media posts that IDF soldiers have put out over the last 15 months. They're building a database of all of the crimes committed by these soldiers. And as these soldiers go on holiday, they're alerting the authorities in these various countries. There was an Israeli soldier who had to be spirited out of Brazil at short notice because the Brazilians were about to arrest him. They put themselves in a horrendous place. And then there's the sort of sad thing about this, but the pointlessness, the futility of this conflict, as I refer to, is they have just created another generation of Palestinians who will be absolutely committed to the principle of armed resistance. I mean, that's an inevitability of what they've done. And as I kind of keep saying, rather like a stuck record, until Israel address the root causes of this conflict, the Palestinian issue, the two-state solution, whatever that is, until they address the root causes of this, they'll just be back at war in 5 years' time, or 10 years' time, or 15 years' time. It's a war without end. War, this has been going on since what, 1948, arguably earlier. Wars in 1967, 1972, 1982, 2006. It's just kind of relentless, and it won't end until the root cause of this conflict is addressed, and that's quite sad, isn't it? And I don't think it's almost as if sort of Netanyahu and the Israelis, and to a certain extent the Americans, are just ignoring all of the lessons of the last 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years. Not just the Israeli lessons, but the failed wars, our failed wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's failed to address that, and they just think that they can use this blunt instrument of military force to try and achieve some kind of a solution. I keep using this expression, heartbreaking, but the more I think about it, the sadder I get about it, because it's all been utterly pointless in my view.
What do you think is the ultimate strategic goal of Israel in this conflict? And I'm bringing that in because if you remember, you must have seen this video, General Wesley Clark, after he retired. Have you seen this video when he talks about, he went back to the Pentagon and he was chatting to his people that used to work for him, and the guy was telling them they've got the 7 countries they want to overthrow. And this was a good at least 15 years ago he was talking about this. I can't remember the exact date. I'll find out. But that list, Iraq, I'm going to have to read it off. I can't remember exactly. Iraq, Lebanon, Sudan, Somalia, Libya, and Iran. So Iran is the last one on that list. What we saw a few weeks ago, is Syria falling. And Israel, because they had already, I don't know how you'd even say this, occupied Golan Heights, which is not only there's oil up there, it's the main water, so one of the main water sources in that area. And then they've moved in after bombing Lebanon. which is a sovereign country, and then bombing Syria, which is another sovereign country. And then they've got this fella, what's his name? Ahmed al-Sharaa, I think it is, this ex-Al-Qaeda guy who's now taken over. And you have to start wondering, what is this? Is the strategy something bigger? And is that strategy going to involve Iran? Now, I guess we're getting slightly off the topic there, but you've got Hezbollah in Lebanon, and you've got the Syrian, well, they are an ally of Russia. And it just seems to me that you're building up another, I guess, what would you call it, even a base, a front, to then go and do something about Iran. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, and you kind of voicing there what I think many people say, and your question's a brilliant one about, what ultimately is the Israeli sort of political strategic goal or goals here. And there are many people, as you rightly say, who believe that it is all about the establishment of a greater Israel across the Middle East. There are many, many people who say that. There are very many people who I think would tell you that one of the key strategic goals of Israel in this war has been the expulsion of the Palestinians from Gaza. Whether one believes that or not, one can understand why people do sense those particular feelings, or they voice those particular feelings. I mean, I was just kind of quickly scribbling down what I think the strategic goals would be. I suppose after the 7th of October, Israel sought to restore deterrence, to deter future attacks, not just from Hamas, but from Hezbollah, from Iranian militias in Iran, and also to deter Iran. And that's interesting because when you look at it in that way, if that is a strategic goal, they have achieved a degree of short-term success. I don't believe it's enduring. I don't believe it's long-term success. So in a way, they have restored security, which would be probably an overarching political goal. So they have done that. In the short term, they have definitely restored security and deterrence in Israel. So probably tick VG is how they might judge themselves on a balanced scorecard. And I suppose what they've also done, which would be a key goal, albeit unspoken, is maintain the political status quo inside Israel, whereby they occupy the West Bank and they keep Gaza under, effectively a blockade and therefore an occupation. So I suppose, those are probably what one might define as their key strategic goals. The problem with those, with all of them, is I think what they've achieved, as I say there, is just short-term success. I don't think they've changed the calculus in any significant way that means that those will endure. So we could well be back to, if this ceasefire endures and Israel do pull out completely out of the Gaza Strip, under phase 2 and phase 3 of this ceasefire, and leave Hamas in control, then Hamas will undoubtedly reconstitute. They'll regrow their military capability. They'll probably struggle to get the same level of military support, etc., from Iran, but they will absolutely reconstitute, and it will only be a matter of months, I suspect, before they're capable of firing rockets, out of Gaza back into Israel. And within a few years, they'll probably be capable of more significant action, the likes of which we saw on the 7th of October. Same with Hezbollah, same with the others. Armed resistance will not go away until Israel address the fundamental issues here. It's kind of a bit like, you'll get this, Nick, or you served in Northern Ireland with me. If we just kind of taken a pure, blunt military approach to the problem in Northern Ireland in 1969, the army on the streets maintained military primacy beyond 1976, and just hammered away the Republican provisional IRA, effectively, just hammered away. But chances are we'd still be doing that. We only achieved resolution to the Northern Ireland troubles by bringing about a political solution in 1999 with the Good Friday Agreement. And that was, less about the military and the intelligence and the police. It was more about the economics. It was about development. It was about changing, society. It was about reducing the civil injustices, of social injustices, that brought about that war in 1969 or that problem in 1969. And unless Israel take that kind of approach to the Palestinian issues and address the fundamental problem, and I keep saying this war, this confrontation will not end, and we'll be back at war 5 years or 10 years time. And my sense, Nickel, we'll probably be doing a podcast in about 10 years time, when the next round of fighting breaks out in Israel.
Yeah, if we're the survivors of the nuclear blasts, of course.
Oh, you're cheery.
Yeah. No, it's all a bit weird right now that I think it's because you and I grew up in a certain time when there were nuclear, it was a major nuclear threat. Then between Russia and the US, Gorbachev and Reagan, they decided to decommission these nuclear weapons. That got chucked out the window not so long ago, and it seems to be back on the table. And people are still pushing for a war with Russia. Now, from my point of view, I'm pro-humanity, Charlie. I'm an old softy nowadays in my dotage. Even the right or wrong, if this does go kinetic, which it's that President Putin has said, if you guys step one foot in the country, then we're going to use our nuclear doctrine. Whether you believe him or not is not really the point. The point for me is that's on the table, and you're talking about I was actually going to ask you, what was the name of that organization that were documenting the videos that the Israeli soldiers are documenting their own crimes?
It's named after that 6-year-old girl that was killed by an Israeli tank quite early on, Hind Rajab.
Right.
She was called, and this organization is called the Hind Rajab Foundation.
Right.
Definitely worth having a look at. They're doing some quite interesting stuff in my view.
Yeah. Well, I'm quite, active on Telegram. There are quite a few good journalists, independent journalists who I like to see what they're up to. And there's a lot of content coming in from not only Ukraine, Russia. Some of it I can't watch. I'm just not even going to watch it because you're basically watching guys running away from drones, running for their lives with it being chased by a drone, which then detonates next to their head. Now, that you're talking the horrors of World War I trench warfare. You now have that trench warfare in 2024, 2025, where death robots are flying after you, trying to kill you, which is something out of a horror film from the 80s, really. So you see that kind of thing. You also see the videos on Telegram as well from some of the Israeli channels, or I don't know if they are Israeli, but they're certainly with Israeli writing. And they're self-documenting what they're doing, which I find is a bit nuts and it's a little bit crazy. But to the point being is that even if he is bluffing, Putin is bluffing, that we're at the point where it's a possibility. Younger people don't seem to see the threat as it is right now, the threat being a very real threat that even if it's just tactical nuclear bombs, which sounds all very nice, it's still a bloody nuclear bomb, and it's still going to have huge consequence certainly to the climate, because the amount of dust and everything it puts up in the and we were terrified as kids of these nuclear winters we were told all about. So you have a bit of a disconnect in that particular theatre, and you've got the same, I think, disconnect in Gaza, because what you've got is we're seeing what's happening with our own eyes on the news, but a lot of people don't seem to realize the humanitarian aspect, the humanity aspect of it. Is that these are people with families dying, and it's unacceptable. And if you've got the same thing when it comes to nuclear bombs, it's only a tactical nuclear bomb, which is a locally used nuclear bomb, folks who don't know what those are. It's still a bloody nuclear bomb. And then you've opened the Pandora's box and you've got nuclear war on the table. So it's, for me, like I said, an old peacekeeper, just want things to be rosy for everyone. But it seems we're getting to the point where people just don't quite grasp how serious the situation is.
Yeah, if we talk tactical nuclear weapons, it's an oxymoron, isn't it? If ever there was one. I mean, the detonation of a nuclear bomb is anything other than tactical. It's the ultimate strategic act, ultimate political act. Yeah, no, it does worry me. I was thinking about this the other day, actually, Nickel. There's been quite a lot of nuclear saber rattling by Putin over the last couple of years. And I think the Americans have taken a fairly sort of pragmatic response to that, and they've made their analysis correctly and realised rightly that it's saber rattling, and they haven't allowed this to escalate, which is very wise. And I'm slightly worried when you get somebody who's a little bit more headstrong and a little bit more erratic, like Donald Trump as a president. I'm worried about how he might react if we go through another round of nuclear saber rattling and nuclear threats by Putin in response to what may or may not happen in Ukraine over the next few months or years. And yeah, no, I mean, I think everybody, young, old, I don't think one needs to have lived through the Cold War and the threat of nuclear Armageddon to sort of understand the potential implications of a nuclear confrontation. I mean, yeah, it doesn't bear thinking about, does it? I mean, and the use of a tactical nuclear weapon in eastern Ukraine will have consequences that I don't think any of us could possibly believe. Let's just pray to God that if it ever happened, that people can de-escalate this. They can de-escalate this. There was something that happened recently. There was an interesting incident happened recently, and I can't remember precisely what it was, but I was reading about it afterwards, and I think it was the Russians were concerned that it might be interpreted by the Americans as something happening on a nuclear side, and they were straight onto this hotline that they have to try to de-escalate. And they warned the Americans, and they said, look, whatever you think might be happening isn't happening. It's kind of, and they managed to de-escalate everything instantly. So one rather hopes that at that sort of serious level, there are the means to prevent any kind of escalation on that front. I mean, that's kind of it on the nuclear side, but I worry about Russia, and if I was living in the Baltic states, I'd be very worried about Russia. And I think I know everybody just wants an end to this war in Ukraine, but it's really important that Russia are not rewarded for their aggression, are not rewarded for their illegal invasion of a sovereign state. Because if they are, then they will take it for granted that they could do that again. And it will be interesting if Russia is allowed to get away with that or seem to benefit from what they've done, then it'll be interesting to see how China interpret that in the context of Taiwan as well. And I think that's really important. So that's kind of my thoughts on sort of Ukraine and Russia. I mean, your point that you were making about these drones in Ukraine, Russian and Ukrainian drone warfare, it's absolutely terrifying. And you know, those that footage you refer to, I mean, it's all too prevalent. It's gruesome. It's like a snuff movie. It is a snuff movie.
It is a snuff movie.
Ultimately, every single one, people are dying, you know, at the hands of an FPV drone flown by a 19-year-old, you know, sitting in his trench maybe 3 or 4 miles behind the front line. They're utterly heartbreaking. Yeah, the nature of war doesn't really change. The character of war changes, but the nature of war changes. So, yeah, the character is increased technology, FPV drones, you know, flown by fiber optic cables. It's just extraordinary what they can do with these. But actually war, as you say, it doesn't look that unchanged from what it looked like on the Western Front in 1916. It's remarkable to me. I look at those footage from the trenches, and I think this would be instantly recognisable to our great-grandfathers, you know, who fought in the First World War. Instantly recognisable.
It's grim.
And then, Nickel, you know, to kind of answer your final point about sort of perceptions as to how people look at things, how people watch what's going on in Gaza and interpret it themselves. It's really interesting because when I read about what's going on in Gaza, when I see the footage, of course there's no media allowed in, so we don't see as much as we ought to be seeing. But what I see is very easy for me to interpret. It's very easy. For me, it looks disproportionate. It looks indiscriminate. You know, when you absolutely completely flatten, you know, acre or hectare after hectare after hectare, hundreds of kilometres of urban things just completely destroyed. When you continue to attack hospitals endlessly, go back and keep attacking them. You know, when you attempt to utterly dismantle the Gaza health system, when you strangle Gaza of humanitarian aid, it's pretty clear to me what's going on. I don't see how you can interpret that in any other way, Nicol. And I, those colleagues of mine who choose to interpret in a different way, who choose to try to justify this, I struggle to see their point of view, to be quite honest, Nicol, because to me it's pretty black and white.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that the ICC and the ICJ, are both where they are, would suggest to me that what's going on there has been unlawful and continues to be unlawful. It's pretty clear. It's pretty black and white to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you mentioned a point there that you said about Russia can't be allowed to benefit from their illegal incursion into Ukraine. But we see it in the Middle East right now that Israel can bomb Lebanon with their jets, and they can bomb Syria with their jets. And they say we're taking out, these are Hezbollah or these are terrorists, and we don't know who they're bombing. But you see what I mean? There's going to be a bit of a, you're going to say, well, you can't just say on one side that it's unacceptable and then say on the other side that it's acceptable. What are they going to be there never seem to be any repercussions on Israel. And that's getting back to the point what I was trying to say is this is being supported by the West. And there's not a single politician apart from, there's quite a few now in Europe who are getting heavily castigated right now, who are standing up and saying, listen, this has to stop. And they're being, hauled over the coals by the press. And there's very few military people, it seems to be the retired ones, who are coming out and saying, talking against it. But there's very few politicians coming out against it, which means that there's no real pressure on Israel to not do what they're doing. And so get to the point is there going to be, you've got the ICC and the ICJ, is there anything going to actually happen? Because they just will ignore it because they're not signatories to this. And I don't know if it gets to the point that if you're Netanyahu can't ever leave Israel again. I don't know. It doesn't seem to be like that because he's traveling right now. So you see what I'm trying to say here? We're getting to a point where no one in positions of power are really doing anything to make peace. There's no peacemakers, and everyone seems to be pretty gung-ho on war, which again, I'm trying to figure out, and I can't figure that one out.
I mean, I used to think we were good guys, Nicol. I spent the first 50 years of my life thinking, hey, I'm one of the good guys. We're the good guys. They're the bad guys. And I'm a little less sure that's correct nowadays. What the question where that started to go from? Was it the invasion of Iraq in 2003 or whatever? No, what you say is absolutely kind of right. We're very quick to condemn Russia, talk about international humanitarian law and rules-based international order, and condemn them when they bomb a theatre in Mariupol, 2 years ago. Yeah, we're up in arms. It was over the front page of every newspaper for about 2 days. Look at what the Russians done. And it was absolutely abhorrent what they've done. But then our politicians and certain sections of our media and certain sections of the population almost seem to cheerlead the IDF when they do this inside Gaza. And it's a hypocrisy or a set of double standards on a godlike scale, and it's really difficult. And you are right, Nicol. How can the West, how can G7, whatever, how can America and Europe, United K, be taken seriously in the future by the rest of the world when we have exercised such extraordinary double standards over Russia and Israel? Quite extraordinary double standards. Yeah. And I think organisations like the ICC set up post-war, I think this is almost the death knell for organisations like the ICC. If Netanyahu is allowed to travel to places like Poland, as Poland has said, and various other countries, Germany, whatever, if he's allowed to travel widely in complete ignorance, disobedience of the ICC ruling, what's the point of having that organisation?
Really?
What is the point? It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy that many of these post-war institutions have just been so completely shattered by this particular war. Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? But we're entering a new era, and as I say, I used to think we were good guys. We abided by the rules-based order. We believed in international humanitarian law. We applied it. But we criticised Russia and China and other people who didn't necessarily abide by them. But it doesn't appear to be the case anymore. It seems that we pick and choose when and where we wish to apply those principles. And when we don't wish to, we can just deliberately ignore them. That certainly seems to be the American approach at the moment.
And we went through Sandhurst different times, but the message always there was the same. And talk about propaganda quite a lot nowadays, and how it's becoming really quite obvious, because we were taught about, we're the good guys, we're here to stop, we're here to fight bad guys, we're like superheroes, we come in and we help you out and then we leave, and everything's in a better way, everything's in a better state, and that we were liked and respected across the world for our fairness and our being stand-up guys. Is that propaganda? Because I don't see that much nowadays. I don't see many. It's not very moral for me. I find it, it's almost to the point, like, yeah, well, I almost have to sometimes distance myself from what's going on, because they say, oh, you were in the army, you know all about this stuff. And I say, well, actually, I don't, because I experienced quite a lot of it, but, you don't really... It's difficult to form a moral judgment when what you see is quite clearly immoral.
I mean, yeah. I've been challenged on this in a few interviews and a few podcasts, when I've talked with great pride about my military career and how we were a force for good, as we described ourselves in the 1990s. And many people have sort of challenged me on that one, and it has made me sort of think a little bit more introspectively about certain periods of my military career and, my service in Iraq in particular, 3 tours in Iraq. When at the time I thought we were doing the right thing, and I look back now and realise that, it probably wasn't. I think, Nicola, inevitably us Brits tend to view ourselves as being awfully fair, and I think we tend to view ourselves as rose-tinted spectacles, and we should never really lose sight that our empire and colonialism wasn't hugely moral and virtuous, if I'm being kind of quite candid. And some of the things that we did in some of our colonies, some of the things we did in places like Kenya were pretty flipping unpleasant, quite honestly. And I think we should listen to those groups in society that take umbrage with what went on, and that seek a degree of retribution, because it wasn't all good. So I think we tend to view ourselves, through history, we've tended to view ourselves as the good guys, Nicol, but not everybody has done. I think we're probably all a little bit more introspective at the moment in light of what's going on in Gaza. I think it's been such a polarizing campaign, so polarizing. It always has been, Matt. 2 different groups seem incapable of talking to each other. It seems to be almost incapable of having a sort of rational discussion on this subject. Even in the Oxford Union, when there was a debate recently, that descended into almost disorder. And it's really sort of sad seeing an august body like the Oxford Union, where that was just symptomatic, I think, of how polarising this particular issue is. And again, it surprises me. I don't understand people who can support conduct of this campaign. Keep coming back to that. I just don't understand it, Nicol. Don't understand it amongst my former military colleagues, Nicol, as well. And I am surprised by the number of veterans, and I suspect probably by the number of serving personnel, who seem not necessarily to live by the values and standards that I thought we did live by in the military. I find it kind of very surprising. The number of people who seem to have taken quite extreme views on this particular campaign, speaking out on it. I suspect also, to a certain extent, the number of sort of far-right views that we're seeing by people, which has surprised me. A number of military veterans, I won't name names, but there's almost sort of an extremism about some of these people, which I find really uncomfortable. And the more I see it, the more I hear it amongst the veteran community, the more uncomfortable I become with it.
Yeah. it's Well, actually, funnily enough, talk about timing. I have a Palestinian guy coming to stay in our house tonight with his girlfriend, who's, I think she's Swiss. Can't remember. Anyway, and he hasn't lived there for a long time. He was lucky enough to get out, but he was quite young. So I'm very interested to get his take on it again. I spoke to him briefly about it last time, but it was at the dinner table, and you don't want to bring this sort of stuff up at the dinner table. That's more of a go to the bar and have a beer chat. So I'd be very interested to hear that. And it's so interesting, Charlie, to get your intake. And, whatever people say about you on social media, but its principle, I think, is important. And I think it's very important that if you stand by your principle. And I agree with you to a certain extent, is that you've got, to a large extent, that, we're supposed to be the good guys. How are we not protecting the weak, the huddled masses? That is a problem for me. It's that nothing's been done, and hopefully it's now that corner has turned. Basically,
interesting. A lot of and I say this to sort of journalists, most of my thinking on Gaza is not driven by emotion or by principle. It's driven by logic, and by that I mean I just don't believe that the Israeli strategy and the tactical conduct of this war has been logical in bringing out a better peace and long-term security for Israel. I think it has been entirely counterproductive and illogical. That's kind of really, that's where I've always been on this. That's why I've been so critical of the IDF. It's not driven by an ideology, or ethics or values. There's a bit of that. It's driven by I just don't understand why they would fight a campaign of this nature. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And add to that the whole principles and the legality of it. I mean, that's why I get slightly worked up about it sometimes, Nico.
All right. Well, we agreed to do a little short one this time, and that's pretty much the time that you want. But I think we covered what I wanted to cover, and you got your points across. And I appreciate you coming on. And it's always
Nico, it's lovely to talk to you. Thank you. It's not really a platform. I just enjoy talking to you and being challenged and being made to think about stuff that I don't necessarily think about all that often. And let's hope this ceasefire kind of endures. Let's hope. Let's hope I'm wrong on everything, Nickel. Let's hope this ceasefire endures, and let's hope this does bring about a better peace. Yeah. And let's hope that this is the last violence to erupt inside Israel. Let's hope that quietly going on under the radar is a political process, but will resolve the issue of Palestinian statehood and homeland for the Palestinians. And let's hope that, President Donald Trump can bring about some kind of just peace, enduring peace in Ukraine as well. That's what we all kind of want. So I'm cynical. I don't think it's going to happen, but that's what we want.
Well, me too. You can always be optimistic, and we can pray for the best. But Charlie, thanks very much, bud. And it's good to see you, and we'll see you soon.
Really good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed, Nico.
All right,
Thank
bud.
you.
Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Yes.